Last year's disaster may be over as a weather event, but for many families, the legal and financial recovery continues. Questions about home ownership, FEMA decisions, wills, and what happens to a property after a tragedy like this can determine whether a family keeps a home or faces many years of uncertainty. A free legal clinic coming to Leander on August 4th aims to help eligible residents address those issues. In this episode, we'll discuss the upcoming Protect Your Property Clinic, what residents can expect, and why property documentation is an important part of disaster preparedness and recovery. Welcome to the latest episode of Lean In Leander. Today, we are joined by Brittanny Gomez, who is the Disaster Benefits Team Manager and Attorney at Law for the Texas RioGrande Legal Aid, a nonprofit law firm providing free legal services for qualified Texans. The reason that we're here today is to discuss Protect Your Property Clinic, which is taking place on Tuesday, August 4th, between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. at Round Mountain Community Center, which is at 14340 Round Mountain Road here in Leander. So with that, welcome, Brittanny.
Hi, thank you for having me.
No, really happy to be able to do this. You sent, just to give people a sense of where this is coming from, you sent some information to me in my council per seat, and I knew that there was an opportunity here to highlight this particular effort, given that we were just past the 1 year anniversary of the flooding that took place last year. So I felt it was very topical, something that we can, bring attention to on a larger scale, and hopefully here with the audience and with a few shares and likes on social media, we'll get the word out. So,
Yeah, that's great.
so tell me about this effort in itself. Like what is TRLA's mission? And, what kind of civic legal problems do you guys handle? What's it all about?
Yeah, so TRLA is a civil law firm. We don't do criminal work, but we pretty much cover almost every area of civil law. There's a couple areas that we don't really take because private attorneys typically do those, like personal injury cases. But if it's family law, probate, you name it, if you can think of it, we probably have some attorney here willing to take the issue or take a look at it at least. But one of the reasons why this effort and these clinics are coming around and starting to happen is in the aftermath of a disaster, we see several civil legal issues come into play. And there's kind of a general timeline in which we see those. And one of the particular issues that we see as something we can help in the recovery effort, but also in the preparedness effort, is helping people estate plan. Estate planning allows us to look at the title of people who, homeowners, for example, and make sure that they actually have their home in their names, which often people find out they don't, and they're shocked to figure that out. And if you've gone through a disaster like Leander did last year, you know that not having clear title to your property causes all kinds of problems in getting access to FEMA benefits or other, recovery aid. So that's one reason why we hold these. I specialize in disaster work, and so I also look at these clinics as an opportunity to talk to survivors about appealing their FEMA decisions, or maybe explain why FEMA is making determinations the way they are. And then the estate planning part of that is, hopefully the next disaster doesn't come for several decades down the line. And if that happens, there is a will in place that can be probated to clear title for the next person to inherit, and then they don't come across that same issue of not actually having clear title to their home. So we use it for multiple different reasons for disaster survivors.
Okay, so you kind of touched on the scope of what you guys are doing here. And obviously, I would say I think it's fair to make the assumption that the conversations in Leander would mostly be revolving around some of the flooding that took place last year. And again, a little bit more recently, I think there's been some areas that have been, impacted by the heavy rains that we have. To help me understand who is who is eligible for this? Like there, I know there's some eligibility parameters.
Mhm.
Help us understand what that looks like.
So to be eligible for this clinic in particular, but just TRLA services in general, you have to be considered low income, and that is under 200% of the federal poverty guidelines. And I could go into the math and the detail about all of that, but there's a chart out there that will do a much better job than I will in explaining income level versus the number of individuals in your household. So 200% of the federal poverty guidelines or less. You have to be located within one of the 68 counties that TRLA provides services in. And then you do have to be a U.S. citizen, legal permanent resident, though we do have exceptions to that, which may apply for individuals who are here on U visas or VAWA. And so we always try to take a look at that. And the reason why we have that restriction is because we're funded by the Legal Services Corporation, which gets funding from Congress. So they have implemented that restriction for us. But yeah, generally those three big things are what people need to meet to qualify.
Now, we're going to talk about this as we continue a little bit further in our conversation today, but you do want people to kind of register for this effort on the 4th of August, right? So there's a phone number, I believe there's a website. Do they need to be registered? Is that heavily suggested? If can you just show up and get help?
You can just show up and get help. We do highly suggest that you register in advance. One, it allows us to make sure that we have enough attorneys and paralegals there and supplies to be able to assist you in that moment without having to wait an extended period of time. So we try to pre-register, and then that way that allows the attorneys like myself to look at the case in advance, maybe do some of the drafting in advance so you're not sitting in a crowded space for an hour. Maybe we can knock it out in 30 minutes for everybody's sake. So that's why we encourage people to pre-register. But we definitely have availability if people are able to just walk in. We have paralegals on site, and they are bilingual, English and Spanish speaking, and so they can do intake on site.
Okay, excellent. Well, I wanted to make sure and have that up front. So as we continue to talk about this, if there's anyone who's watching this or gets an opportunity to see this, they can understand as you head towards August 4th. If you think this is something that you can benefit from, make the effort to try to register ahead of time. So I do have a few questions that I kind of wanted to go over. I thought would be a really quick way of us kind of outlining what some of the parameters, or rather some of the issues that might come up that you guys would address. Feel free to tell me I'm wrong if I'm wrong on any
Okay.
of these, right? But we'll do these quick. We don't need to go into long, complicated answers, but let's just try to kind of frame this, and then we can go into a little bit more detail. So I am coming to your clinic. I don't own very much. I don't need a will. True or false?
False.
Okay.
Everybody needs a will. How truncated do you want it?
No, so okay, that kind of takes us to the next question. So, okay, all right. So my family already knows. They know who's going to get the house. I don't need to do any paperwork.
Also false. I hear that a lot, and unfortunately, it's just not the case. The law in Texas is very particular when it comes to property and how it's transferred. Having a will, whether it gets probated or not, usually serves as a written guideline to family members about what your wishes were, and you don't want to end up in a situation where your family is fighting long after you're gone, which is what typically happens when someone dies without a will.
So it's really more of a guideline at minimum than anything else, right? Like this is what I would like to see happen. I would say it's probably fair to say you can't eliminate all legal issues. There's something's gonna come up, but if there's at least a guidebook in place, it's much better, right?
Yeah, correct. And the hopefully the goal is that the family all agrees to what's in the will and will honor your wishes. And there are different mechanisms in place that attorneys can use to try to avoid probating the will, actually bringing the will to court. But sometimes there's not, and like you said, exceptions always apply. An attorney might need to bring it in front of a judge to enforce whatever the issue that is going on. But it is a for sure way to make your wishes known.
Okay, so this next one is a little two-phased. Um, Once you answer the question, then explain what this is. Okay, so
Okay.
um, a transfer on death deed is the right solution for every homeowner. True or false?
Attorneys love to say it depends. And so I will say it depends. I would say in almost every situation, you can benefit from a transfer on death deed. I personally am of the opinion that everybody should have a will and a transfer on death deed. I like backup plans, right? So a transfer on death deed would transfer your property without the will having to go into probate. It's one of those mechanisms attorneys can use to avoid having to go in front of a court, takes the house out of the estate. But if for some reason it fails or it contradicts something else that you have in your estate planning packet, we want to have a will to back that up to make sure that you're covered. Or, maybe you pass away in a car accident and there's a lawsuit that results from that. We want a will to make sure that that money is distributed in the way you would have wished it would have been.
Okay. So a transfer on death deed is literally what it says it is, right?
Yes.
Just this goes when
Very
this happens,
literal.
this happens. Okay.
Exactly.
All
And
right.
they mirror your will, right? So we want to see them match. If it doesn't match your will, then the transfer on death deed governs, and it's something you record in the deed records prior to you passing away. So everybody knows this is what's going to happen when I pass away, and then the will is your backup.
Okay. Well, good. That's a good explanation because now I understand it as well.
Yeah.
Okay, another scenario. I've already been denied by FIFA once. There's nothing more that I can do. Or rather, did I say FIFA?
You
Too
did. You're
close.
so on the World
Too
Cup
close to the
track.
World Cup. Too close to the World Cup. FEMA. If FEMA, so let me rephrase that one. I have been denied by FEMA previously. There's nothing more that I can do. What's the reality there?
That is false. You can always appeal a FEMA decision. Even if the letter from FEMA says this is a final decision, my opinion is you can still appeal it. We have lots of success in appeals. Even if you miss the 60-day deadline in which you can appeal, there's almost always a reason as a disaster survivor that that deadline was missed. And we can use that as a way to appeal late. So, false.
Okay. And then because of the way that you guys approach this and people might look at it like, well, it's free, so it's not as good as the type of legal representation I might get otherwise. Help us combat that particular perception.
Yeah, so the attorneys at TRLA, a lot of us have been practicing for a very long time. A lot of us come from private practice and want to do good work working at a nonprofit. We all come from law schools that are accredited in the country, just like you would see someone in private practice as well. I think the difference here is pro bono work that would be done at a corporate firm is more limited. Whereas when you work at a legal aid, you're truly serving a population that's really in need. And so it's just a different kind of service. But I would say I've been at legal aid for 8 years now. I've worked with some of the best lawyers that have argued in front of the Supreme Court, argued in front of the Fifth Circuit. So I would dispose of that notion as well.
There you go. All right. I think that was a good argument. Oh, I think that was a very good argument there, counselor. I appreciate you. I appreciate making those very, very salient points on that particular argument. Okay, so I am thinking this might be something for me. Do I need to have everything already kind of in place when I register? What's the reality? What does that look like for me?
So you don't have to have everything if you pre-register in place. We're going to ask you some income questions, household composition questions. Again, those go towards the eligibility. And then one of our paralegals will ask you, do you want a will, a transfer on death deed? Are you experiencing any other civil legal issues that you might be aware of? And then they'll gather all of that and put it inside your case. And then if you are participating in the estate planning portion of the Protect Your Property Clinic, they will email you a estate planning questionnaire, which will have, it's a couple pages, and it'll give you the time to sit down and really think about what you want to happen to your property. So it'll have you list out your family members, whether you're married or divorced or prior marriages, all kinds of details. And we give you a couple of days to fill that out so you can take your time, not feel rushed. If you are walking into the clinic, you will be doing that all on a much faster turnaround. Or there is the option that you apply, take that questionnaire, and then we help you after the clinic. Maybe a couple days after, we'll call you back and work on those documents for you. So a couple different options.
Okay, okay. So you don't necessarily have to have all your ducks in a row
Right.
before you show up, right?
Yeah, part of our job and doing estate planning is to help you get the ducks in a row, right? We want to present you options, and you might want to leave the property to all five of your kids. I would say that's probably not the best plan, but we'll talk about why that might not be the best plan for your family.
Okay. Well, actually, that's a great segue because what I kind of wanted to talk about is, why does this matter after disaster? What are we really trying to accomplish? So, what kind of legal problems tend to emerge? You kind of touched on it there. What's more urgent? What should we address? How should we prioritize after a disaster, or even a year after disaster? How do we address these things?
Yeah, so you can't see it, but I'm pulling up. There is a actual timeline of legal needs in which legal aids across the country, as well as Legal Services Corporation, have collected data from all the individuals that we have represented over the decades of experience in working in disasters. And we see the same kinds of legal issues come up in a very similar timeline, almost, in a way we can replicate it into a timeline. So, typically after a disaster in those 1 to 6 weeks, we call those short term legal issues. We're starting to see like eviction cases, unemployment claims. Maybe people need access to disaster food stamps or disaster unemployment assistance. And then people are applying for FEMA. Maybe they're trying to get into temporary housing and shelter. And then, unfortunately, after a disaster, we often do see an increase in domestic violence cases and family cases. So we do see a lot of those cases come in that short-term period. And then midterm is about 6 weeks to like 6 months after a disaster. That's when we really start seeing those FEMA appeals come in. We start seeing a lot of consumer issues, insurance questions, maybe some contractor problems. And of course, the family law cases continue, the eviction cases continue, and we see title disputes. So, what I was mentioning before, when we start looking into estate planning, is we start looking at the chain of title in which someone came to own their home or their manufactured home. And if we start spotting issues there, we can resolve them and maybe help them still qualify and appeal a FEMA decision. And then in the long term, we're like a year to 10 years after, we're seeing like larger systemic problems that are coming out of communities, maybe, larger civil lawsuits, that kind of thing.
So can unclear ownership and like missing documents and stuff like that, does that delay this process? Are those some of the causality of some of those issues that you see legally?
Yeah, for sure. So when someone inherits a home and there's not an actual document that says they own it, it causes all kinds of legal issues. You're going to have issues with paying property taxes. You're going to have problems getting homestead exemptions in place. And there's exceptions into those, of course, but there's still sometimes you need like a strong hand behind you to kind of get some of the offices to apply those things. And then of course, you're always susceptible to becoming unhoused if you can't prove that you own the home that you actually live in. And then, of course, a lot of nonprofits and government agencies open up disaster aid, and they want to be 100% sure that the person they're providing the assistance to is the homeowner, or that they're not going to build a new home and then someone else come in and say, actually, I own this land, not this person. So there's a lot of reasons why it can cause a lot of problems and a lot of delays.
So I would think, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, but one of my questions was like, are people surprised to learn that by living in a residence or paying tax on a home, it doesn't necessarily resolve all of the legal ownership issues? And you kind of touched on it there. Is that what you see generally speaking, that over a period of time there's maybe some lack of clarity as far as the ownership timeline or the ownership the title?
Yes, yeah. So that's probably one of the bigger issues that I deal with, and I really kind of like it. It's like a really nerdy area to kind of get involved in. I never thought I was going to be a big property attorney, but I was surprised to realize, after graduating law school and becoming an attorney, and realizing that people just didn't understand and weren't given the resources or information to understand that when someone passes away and you inherit a home, you don't have anything that says you own it. You may own it, but there's nothing for, the third party to know for sure. And that you have to probate, or you have one of these other tools in your toolbox to be able to resolve that. And so I was a little naive coming into practicing law and figuring out, like, whoa, this is a much bigger problem than I thought it was going to be in my day-to-day practice. And that's partly on us as attorneys, and not, doing a better job at educating our communities about the steps that need to be done after that. But yeah, for sure, it is a significant problem in Texas, but also across the country. Other states experience this problem as well.
So on that note, is this specifically for disaster survivors, or can other eligible community members? I mean, if you're meeting that threshold on your cost of living, I forget what we said earlier. I'm
Yeah,
forgetting the
the
term right
income
now.
and the
The income,
citizenship. Yeah.
yes,
So
yes, the income
the
levels. If you meet that, can you still come seek help at this? You don't necessarily have to have experienced some of the tragedy we saw here last year.
Yeah, absolutely. I would encourage anyone that may feel like they have a legal issue, because often people don't identify the issue that they're dealing with as a particularly legal one in which you would get an attorney for. So if you feel like you are experiencing something that you might think is a legal issue, for sure stop by. And you can talk to someone, and if you just want to do an intake and then get a call back, or leave one of our staff members your name and phone number, we can call you at a later date and do an intake. That's something we're absolutely open to. We want to make ourselves as accessible to the community as possible. Leander is in the community in which we serve, those 68 counties. And so we're always around, whether we have an office in that space or not. We want you to know that we're here to help.
Okay, so I'm going to pivot a little bit here, just
Mhm.
a tad, and I'm going to kind of get a little bit more into the FIFA matters. So FIFA, I did it again. The FEMA matters.
Okay.
So FEMA, what kind of FEMA related matters can your clinic staffing necessarily help, or are able to review?
Yeah. So if a survivor comes in or registers in advance and has some FEMA documentation with them, one of the things we typically do is we go ahead and put in a request to FEMA to send us all of your documents. We want to see the entire file. And that's not just the letters that FEMA sends the disaster survivors with requesting more information, or maybe approving or denying them assistance. It includes inspector notes. It includes conversations that the disaster survivor or whoever has had with the FEMA staff, or maybe a contractor. And that gives us a fuller picture of what's going on. It also gives the disaster survivor significantly more information than what they have to begin with. If they have a FEMA letter with them and they know why they were denied, we can talk to them about that, and talk to them about, different appeal options, in which we can help them with. My staff does basically every kind of appeal that FEMA, that you can do with FEMA. So if you were denied home repair assistance because they said that the damage wasn't caused by the disaster, well, that's something we're equipped to be able to help you appeal. If you get contractor estimates, if they say you didn't own your home, that's something we can help you prove that you did, or help you sign an affidavit saying you do that. If they say, your vehicle wasn't flooded, even though it very clearly was flooded, that's something we can help with, in getting the documentation to help support that claim and send it off to FEMA. So when we're meeting with you one-on-one, we probably won't submit the appeal at the clinic, but we'll be gathering all of the information and having you sign documents for us to be able to get the copy of that file.
So again, there you're kind of highlighting one of the reasons that if this is something that you're interested in, or you feel that would be of benefit to you, it's a good idea to register ahead of time, because then you're going to have the type of information you need at TRLA to go out and make those FEMA requests and try to get that documentation ahead of time. What's the normal turn time on that? Like, if you know someone's registered tomorrow, and we're talking about August 4th, you're comfortable saying, yeah, by August 4th, we'll have that information.
We
Um,
won't. We probably will not have the document in hand. What we will have is the ability to call FEMA and get dates, denials and information from them over the phone. Um, FEMA, like every government agency, is overwhelmed and has staffing issues. And of course, they have the other issue of more disasters happen, the further behind they get. And so sometimes, if there's multiple disasters going on at a time, it might take a couple of weeks or, after Hurricane Harvey, a couple of months
Hmm.
to actually get the physical file. But us being able to put in the request beforehand authorizes FEMA to start talking to us on the phone. So what we might be
Gotcha.
able to do is sit in front of you and say, okay, you mentioned you had no documents. I can tell you that on these 3 separate days, you got a letter and they said you were denied for X, Y, and Z. And now we can talk about, ways we can move forward on that.
Now, is FEMA set up in such a way that are there groups that help with your clinic specifically? Like, do they know you're doing this and they're ready to help you, or are you in the queue with everybody else?
We're in the queue with everybody else.
Okay.
Shortly after a disaster, there are FEMA VALs, is what they call them, voluntary agency liaisons, and they'll pop up in the community. And sometimes, shortly after a disaster, we've partnered with them where they were at our clinic and they were able to print out documentation for us so that we could advise the disaster survivor, or we were able to, if it was a simple issue, we were able to provide the document they needed to FEMA right then and hopefully get that appeal submitted in the moment. But for this clinic, unfortunately, I don't believe there are any VALs around. So we're in
And
the
as
queue just like everyone.
so in that particular instance, I know that because people get concerned, you're skeptical, you hear things, whether it's information, misinformation, however you want to frame that, right? Let's clear this up because I think it's important that people understand you're taking part in free legal help. That doesn't affect any type of eligibility for FEMA or any other benefits otherwise, right? It doesn't change anything. You just get
Correct.
help.
Correct. You get somebody helping you submit the appeal. We'll help draft it and send it to them. And then when FEMA inevitably follows up with asking for more information, we will talk with them. A similar example might be a disaster case manager. If a disaster survivor has worked with a disaster case manager over the past couple of months, it's kind of similar to that, but you have attorneys doing it in which they can make legal arguments on your behalf where a disaster case manager won't be able to. But no, we do not receive funding from FEMA. We do not work on behalf of the insurance agencies. Sometimes people think we work for FEMA. We do not. I promise you, FEMA knows we do not work for them. And so we are able to kind of come at this as like a third party removed from the situation and get the two to meet together.
So mitigation more than anything else, right?
Yeah, almost like a mediator, but it's
Right.
an attorney working on your behalf.
Well,
Just
never a
like
bad
we would in a
idea.
courtroom, but this time it's through an administrative appeal.
Yeah, I was going to say never a bad idea when it comes to these types of issues. Your event materials also mention property tax exemptions.
Hmm.
So that we make sure that we're trying to at least the best we can in this limited amount of time. I want to set expectations for people. What kinds of exemptions or problems may be discussed in your clinic? Like what's the scope there?
Yeah, so sometimes when we talk with disaster survivors, and a lot of our client population in general tend to qualify for homestead exemptions, senior exemptions, disabled veteran exemptions, all kinds of things, as well as, whether they can get tax deferrals or tax rate decreases because their property was impacted by a disaster. So first we'll look at your title, make sure everything's all clear there. We'll start talking to you about the exemptions that you do have. A lot of times we see disaster survivors with unclear title aren't qualifying for the exemptions that they're actually eligible for. And so we can help them do that, right? We can help them fill out the paperwork from the county tax office, from the county appraisal district, and help them fill out the exceptions that apply even when you don't have proof you own your home, like an airship statement or something like that. So that's kind of the detail we'll get into on that. And then whether they want to do it on their own or they want us to do it for them and submit it for them, that's an option as well.
So in that particular range of topic, are there any kind of deadlines or appraisal district procedures that people should kind of be aware of if that's part of what they want to find out more about?
Yeah, I think trying to remember the exact deadline off the top of my head. I know every year you have a certain deadline to apply for your homestead exemption and all of that, but there are exceptions to allow you to apply late in which the county will consider. And so often being a disaster survivor is a good enough reason for you to be applying late. Or we are working to clear title and get it into your name. You just got clear title. Now is a good time for you to do it. So there's a couple of exceptions that we can go through, and the deadlines don't apply, but generally they do, and we can advise you for the next year about getting it in timely or something.
And within that advisory, role, you guys can provide people with referrals and next steps and things of that nature. So even if you can't help them, you can help them, right?
Yes. So if someone comes into the clinic and they don't income qualify or they don't meet our citizen eligibility requirements or whatever the reason is, we are always able to provide legal information if we're not able to provide, direct tailored advice where we would sit down and talk to you. So we do have legal information. We could talk to you about you getting forms from the county appraisal district or from the tax office, and provide you with website information like texaslawhelp.org is a website in which all the legal aids put a bunch of legal information out there. And it's a great resource for people who are looking to do this on their own or just need a little bit of support but don't necessarily want to take on a full attorney.
So now I'm going to pivot back to one thing we talked about a little bit earlier. We were talking about the difference between transfer on death and then wills. You've already made the statement that you encourage people to have both. So in plain language, what does a will do that a transfer on death deed does not do, and vice versa?
So a transfer on death deed only applies to real property. It can apply to multiple pieces of real property if you own a home and then maybe you own a piece of property in another county or something. But it only applies to real property. And a transfer on death deed is something that has to be recorded while you're living in the deed records in which the property, in the county deed records in which the property sits. A will can deal with real property, but it can deal with everything else as well. So if you have specific gifts that you would like to put in there, like you want your 2016 Nissan, whatever, to go to your child, you can put that in there. Certain jewelry, heirlooms, all of that, you can put it in your will and have that go through probate. Like I said, you can also list real property that way. A will also govern in situations, like I mentioned, if you pass away from a medical incident and there's a lawsuit or a car accident or something like that, and money is coming into the estate, there's usually a clause in a will. It's called a residuary clause, and it tells you what to do with property that you get into the estate. Wills also govern how debts are paid. So the law requires certain debts to be paid first, but people get to take what they're gifted out of a will prior to debts being paid. That might not be the case if you die intestate or without a will. So there's multiple reasons why you should do a will and a transfer of death deed.
Thank you for that thorough explanation once again, because I mean, I don't know these things, and I'm like, wait a second, that's kind of interesting. So essentially, just for the less well, how can I say this?
For the
So if I don't
layperson.
understand,
Yeah.
so you said it earlier, and you said real property. Was that the term you used?
Yes.
So real property,
Homes and land
it's
and
land,
that kind
right?
of thing.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's what
land.
you mean by real property,
Yes.
because like real property is not my cup.
Right.
That's something else, right?
This is personal property. Your cup is
Gotcha.
personal property. Your real property would be your home, your land. It may be your manufactured house. That really kind of depends on a lot of things and how you elect to have it done for tax purposes. But for the general idea, you're thinking of houses, land, farmland, that kind of thing for real property.
Perfect. Thank you for the clarification, because
Yeah,
it's
of
always
course.
it's just language, right? It's just how people think about
Exactly.
things, and when you say real property, I'm like, well, this is real, but
Yes,
it's not
it
necessarily
exists. I
real
see
property,
it.
right? Okay. All right. So, who in your mind should be considering either making up or updating a will, given some of the context that we've been talking about, like
Mhm.
the disaster. Let's say maybe they weren't directly impacted by the disaster. Should they still be thinking about these things?
Yeah, absolutely. I was in my 20s when I was fortunate to buy my house and when I got married. And when I bought my house before I married my husband, I drafted a will and a transfer on death deed for the both of us. And when we got married, we updated those. And when we had a child, we updated it again. And so everybody should really be thinking about it. Of course, there are people who are going to be thinking about it more naturally, right? As you get towards the end of your life, you start to think about these things if you've gone through a medical issue, maybe you've experienced cancer or some other kind of diagnosis in which you've kind of had to confront that reality. People often think about those things, but I would not say that a will is not something that a 20 or 30-year-old should also be considering. Unfortunate things happen to people all the time, and so you want to make sure. But for sure, if you own a home, you should definitely be estate planning just to make absolutely sure that that property transfers the way you intended to.
So you kind of bring up a good point there, and it's actually not one of my questions, but you prompted a question in my mind. So if I am the relative, the aunt, the younger aunt, or the child of someone who has maybe been touched by some of these tragic events, or maybe is just at risk, right? And they haven't done this, or you're not sure that they have. Is that the type of person? Does it make sense for them to maybe register here and ask some of these questions to clarify, even for their parents or another relative?
Yeah, so we can help the person that has the legal issue. So if you are applying on behalf of someone, we're going to have to talk to the person who it's actually going to impact. But you can, if they consent, you can definitely sit in on that meeting and have conversations. I sit with my mother and my grandmother when they have conversations about what they want to do with their estate planning, even if I'm not the attorney, right? And so you can't apply on behalf of someone and try to estate plan for them, but you can attend the appointment with them. It just has to be the person with the legal issue. That's the applicant.
Right. Okay. So again, you kind of get into some other legal jargon like power of attorney and things of that nature.
Yes,
You don't necessarily need to have that to have the conversation, but you do need to have consent. Is that fair?
yes, yeah.
And if you did have that, then potentially you could be the person who is discussing some of these legal areas that we've been talking about.
Yes, yeah. If they give us permission to talk to you and we get that, written down and put into the case, then we can talk to you about, different options. And we see that a lot with some of our older clients. They want a child to help them make decisions or, kind of think about things. So no, you don't necessarily have to have like a formal legal document saying that you're allowed to talk to us, but we do need consent from the person who has the legal issue.
So we're kind of touching on this. This is one of my questions. So what are some of the misconceptions? Because you've kind of hinted at it a little bit of estate planning. A lot of people will think, oh, I don't really have an estate. I'm not a wealthy
Right.
person, right? I'm not a one percenter. Why should I even be thinking about this? What help us understand in a rough sketch what why that's not true.
Yeah, I can almost think of almost everybody I know would benefit from having some sort of legal document to help in the aftermath. One, it helps with infighting and family members. People are grieving. It is a very difficult time, and nobody wants to be fighting about mom told me this, but mom told me this, and they're two different things. It makes it very difficult for you to process and grieve and go through that process. It makes it very difficult if you have to hire attorneys. I'm an attorney. Nobody wants to hire us, I promise. Nobody wants to have to sit in an attorney's office and talk about fighting their siblings about what mom would have wanted. And while judges are very nice, they have to follow certain rules and they have to follow the law. And so having a will in advance, and I always encourage my clients, I've encouraged my own family, even if it's uncomfortable, once you have your will, sit down with your children and tell them that this is what you want. Explain it to them. It is difficult to do, but it will solve a lot of problems and it'll give them peace. when you pass, right? And it gives you clarity in knowing that your children may be at peace once you pass. It solves a bunch of other problems in the fact that, like I mentioned before, all of the title issues no longer become as complicated as they could be. Owning a home is absolutely a reason to consider having a will and a transfer on death deed, but I help a lot of renters who have a lot of personal items that they want to make sure go to certain family members or to certain friends. And so owning a home is not a requirement by any means. If you're a renter and you have family heirlooms, that is a perfectly valid reason to have a will.
And you've really been one of the best guests I've ever had to set up my segues because you just kind of get me there. It's that
I listen
you're
to a lot of
yeah,
podcasts.
it's
Maybe
really
that
funny
helps.
because it's the funniest thing. You're taking us to the next little question, which is great. Makes it so much easier. Um, I do want to touch on this because I think it's important, and you just kind of covered it a little bit, but let's dig into that a little bit more. You know, help people understand why this type of individualized legal advice is better than, you know, an online form or chat GPT. I mean, why does this make sense?
Yeah. I have seen lots of online wills done. I have probated some of them. Some of them do work. Some of them require a lot of work to get them to work. This is a situation in which it's specifically tailored to you. Forms can do their best, but they are meant to be general and they are meant to be broad, and they don't necessarily fit what you want to happen exactly. And so you're going to end up compromising in one way or another when you're using, a template or an online form. ChatGPT, I use it. I use, AI in my day to day, personally as well as at work sometimes. It doesn't always give you exactly what's right, right? So it takes in information and then it kind of digests it for you and gives you an answer that you would want. But the law doesn't always give you what you want. And so you want to know that going in, and you want to be able to talk to someone that says, if I ask Chat, can I leave my property to my 5 children? Chat's going to say yes. But I, as an attorney, would say, okay, but let's think about why you want to do that. Are you trying to protect someone who might become unhoused? Are you trying to protect someone that receives public benefits or has disability and you want to make sure they get to stay in the home? There are other avenues to do that in which multiple people don't end up owning a home.
Great answer. It's the funniest thing because I mean, unfortunately, there's a segment of society that has a misnomer. I think a lot of it has to do with Law and Order. It's been on way too long, but people have
I
a
love it.
different.
It's a good show to watch.
I've seen everything 1,000 times, so I'm like, but people have a wrong impression as a result, is what I'm kind of trying to say, and for good or bad. I'm being a little facetious, but I think it's important that you do understand that to protect yourself legally, and understanding, and the reality is that even with that documentation, like I said earlier, there's going to be something that comes up that you didn't necessarily account for.
Right.
However, that said, it shouldn't be a reason that you don't do the accounting in the first place, right? Have a plan. At least that way, it's a little bit more defined. And I think you make a great case for why that should be, like why it's important to do those things. So I appreciate the way that you've approached the subject matter today, and I appreciate all of the help that you've given us. I know we haven't covered everything. We don't necessarily have time to cover everything, but before we wrap up, if there's one thing that you want people to remember from this conversation, what would that be?
Well, we're going to go two because I can't ever just do one, right? One, come to the clinic. Even if you are, worried that it's not actually a legal problem, you are not wasting our time or resources. We are there to make sure that you are taken care of and that you get the information or advice that you need. So come to the clinic whether you feel silly or not. I promise you, we've seen everything. So you do not worry about that. And then two is, I was a disaster survivor myself. I've grown up in Southeast Texas my entire life. So I understand what it feels like to be overwhelmed and to be a year out from a disaster and still be in a place of limbo or feel a little distraught and feel, overwhelmed in the recovery process. And so, um, knowing that even if you don't come to the clinic, that you can call our hotline or you can reach out to us on our website, and do it in your own time. If that's 1 o'clock in the morning when you're up watching your, reality TV or whatever, whatever's convenient for you. It's, legal services are free for a reason. Access to justice is very important. And so just don't hesitate to reach out. I promise we will do our absolute best to make sure that you get the information you need.
So again, just kind of put a cap on it. The Protect Your Property Clinic is taking place on Tuesday, August 4th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Round Mountain Community Center, which is at 14340 Round Mountain Road in Leander. So registration, you do that with a phone number, right?
Yes, so there is a phone number. It's separate from our general hotline. It's actually my paralegal's office number. That way you can get through and you can text that number and ask for an appointment. She'll work with your schedule to make sure you can get that done. That phone number is 830-774-8309. And that is to register for the clinic.
Okay. And any other information that you might want to look for as it relates to services provided by TRLA and maybe other research type material that you might find, you can find on the TRLA website, correct?
Right, correct. So it's trla.org.
Okay, perfect. Well, Brittanny, I want to thank you so very, very much for doing this. I hope that this is something that will help people understand what you're doing. I think the services that you provide there at TRLA are exceptional. I think it's fantastic to know that there's people who do that and do it to help the communities in need without any kind of pre-qualification outside of the economic issue.
Right.
If you need the help, come and get the help. And I think that's the bottom line. So again, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time. And any last words?
No, thank you so much for having us and giving us the opportunity to, promote this event and get our name out there. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. Well, that's all for this episode, folks. We'll have some of those resources available online in all of the regular social media places. So click the links or call the number. And again, I want to thank Brittanny with TRLA for speaking with us today. And if you do need assistance and you have any other questions, by all means, feel free to reach out to their organization, and I'm sure they'll be able to help you. So again, thank you for your time, and we'll see you at the next episode. Thanks, Brittanny.
Thanks.